The cenotes of Tulum, Mexico, are however unbelievable, as they may be wonderful in cave jumping. A cenote is a sinkhole in limestone rock with water at the base that has been etched for millennia, making a lovely cavern framework. They stretch for north of 220 miles, with additional caves underneath the surface that presently can't seem to be investigated. 100 years after the principal revelation, jumpers travel from one side of the planet to the other to get a brief look at the submerged magnificent. Yet not all jumpers get back. The charm is obvious, yet there are dangers of going into the water. Gambles with that occasionally lead to dying. Unbeknownst to the pair that entered the cenote, that day their lives would change everlastingly. This is their story. Hi, everybody, and welcome to my feed, where we cover all shocking and dread stories. So, on the off chance that you partake in this kind of happy, remember to stir things up around town and buy in button, in addition to ring the notice chime to be informed of all new transfers presently. We should get into the present story. Cave plunging is a sporting action that couple of on the planet try to take on. However, to the 1% that do, they stomach the risk to see and investigate portions of the earth that not many have, and in certain conditions no one preceding them has, while impossible to any of us with our feet got straightforwardly to the ground. Those not many that decide to plunge into the inward profundities of the earth with only their stuff and a couple of electric lamps find it tranquil and quiet, as though every one of the concerns on the planet fall away around you for those couple of hours, in spite of the fact that anybody can buy them gear and track down a cavern to jump into. There are severe rules that are prescribed and in many spots expected to guarantee that specific guidelines are observed. Whenever that you enter the water, this cavern plunging course is constantly suggested, as authorized cave jumpers are appropriately prepared to accomplish this feeling of harmony, despite everything returned to their friends and family. While cave plunging, one inhales a combination of gas through a canister called Trimix, so they can proceed with their experience in relative well-being. The combination of helium, nitrogen, and oxygen is adapted to how profound the arrangement. Jump is the further the plunge, the more helium would be expected to gradually supplant the nitrogen, a confounded combination of gas, yet important to comprehend for those proposing to plunge into the profundities of a cavern. One of the most known dangers of cavern jumping is creating decompression disorder, which is brought about by the air pockets of gas, essentially nitrogen, that happens in your body with an unexpected difference in pressure. This can, in a real sense, make the gas bubble inside your joints, with leaving you muddled and uncertain of yourself, as though you had an extraordinary evening to remember with your companions, while a comparative impact to being intoxicated. Nitrogen narcosis, or being narked, is a hazardous result that, generally speaking, prompts passing as the jumper flips out and the inward profundities of a cavern. Alongside being narked, there are huge different dangers. For example, hardware disappointment, running out of juice, basically getting derailed, and the deadliest of all, yourself overreacting under the water, is the most certain method for prompting messy errors, botches that can and will end with you dying. These are the dangers of entering in probably the most uncommon puts on earth. The charm of swimming through an area that has less eyes than the outer layer of the moon is excessively tempting for the not many fearless enough to equip. On November 26, 2016, Alessandro Moreno and Amy Arriaga went into the excellent cenote with the expectation to have a quiet and lovely jump into one of the most astounding underground caverns on earth. Amy had recently passed her cavern plunging certificate course, drove by Alessandra 2 days earlier, and was prepared to take on the well-known cenotes of Tulum. While Alessandro was a confirmed teacher, he was not completely the most experienced jumper, as he had as of late gotten his educator's permit. However, regardless, had dove the caverns previously and felt comfortable around. Jumpers as well as travelers drop in huge numbers consistently to lay their eyes and swim through the perfectly clear water, numerous not wandering from a couple of feet underneath the surface, yet those daring enough could go into quite possibly of the biggest submerged cave frameworks on the planet, extending for north of 220 known miles. There are cenotes all around the wildernesses of Tulum. Many have been found by accident, as they were all on confidential land. This is an incredible fascination for travelers, and an extraordinary wellspring of income for local people that own the land as it drives their little economy. The two jumpers would enter excellent cenote utilizing side mounts, a type of plunging where they would have the tanks of gas mounted to their side rather than their backs. This takes into consideration more straightforward access through more modest region of the cavern. They examined the plunge plan completely prior to entering the water that morning. They were to begin in the Great Cenote, and Amy would be driving consistently. The jump line, which is a line of rope set up through the cavern framework, was at that point laid out as this was a well-known course. However, there were regions where they would need to play out a leap. This would mean they would need to leave the fundamental line, and utilizing their own rope they carried with them, proceeded with the excursion until they reconnected with an alternate primary line. They arranged a plunge through two leaps interfacing within Cenote and passing the entry of a little cenote called No Name prior to pivoting and getting back to fantastic Cenote. They would arrive at a greatest profundity of 12 meters or 40 feet, which implied they wouldn't need to stress over decompression since they were not diving sufficiently deep to cause nitrogen narcosis. They would likewise be keeping the guideline of thirds, which implied that they would utilize 33% of their gas on the outing through the cavern, 33% of the gas on the excursion back, and leave a third for anywhere crises so subsequent to settling on the course time and profundity. The two jumpers excited at this point, quiet prepared, and at 11:26 am they placed in their controllers and lowered themselves. Alessandro would introduce the essential line, and vast water in the wake of lowering this would interface with the fundamental line a couple of feet into the cave. The principal line doesn't run into untamed water, so unconscious swimmers and swimmers don't screw with or follow the line into the cavern. They were the primary group to enter that day. Significance: there could have been no different lines in the cavern as of now, so they effectively arrived at the primary line and spot treats, prompting the vast water. A treat is a roundabout piece of plastic that hooks onto the line, flagging that the jumper entered this piece of the cavern. Every treat would have the jumper's initials on it, and they would get them as they exit, so everybody knew where the jumper had been, or alternately is. In the event that there was ever a crisis or a quest for the jumper, they would normally go with a treat with a bolt, one more straightforward piece of plastic that places toward the exit. Consistently, this was to forestall getting lost or swimming off course of the line in the event that you are uncertain of your environmental elements. While in the water around 25 minutes into the plunge and a couple of moments off of their arranged time, they arrived at the primary leap. Alessandro showed Amy the normal light seeping into the cave from untold Cenote. They checked their air supply and measures, both completely quiet, yet anxious to proceed. Alessandro was recording for Amy as she dove through the cave and had taken a few astonishing pictures all through the jump. After they both concurred, they were fine to continue on. They took the leap, laying lime through the cavern as they wandered off the really one, leaving treats and bolts, driving down the way they had quite recently swam through. Minutes passed as they smoothly swam through the delightful still water, quiet to some, soon enough for you or I, yet not long enough for jumpers. They arrive at the end point of their plunge and started to pivot to begin the swim back. Everything to this point was going fabulous. Amy was partaking in each second swimming through the cavern, as this was more than she had at any point envisioned to this end. She went through extended periods of time getting her permit. These minutes made it all worth the effort. They before long arrived at the little access to unheard of cenote off to one side, and Alessandro tapped Amy to show her and flagged. They switch out their lights for brief seconds, completely dark, broken by the little light emission, radiating through the little entry, prompting the outer layer of the cenote, maybe the light from the sky above. Enlightening just what was intended to be seen, Alessandro took photos of the normal light crawling into the cavern while swimming in obscurity water 30 feet deep down. They couldn't resist the opportunity to become close to home at the excellence. All things considered, only another second to absorb it all. Alessandro flipped on his light, and with the line on his left side and the cenote to his right, started taking photos of the cavern. Yet after around 30 seconds, he turned 90 degrees and his heart dropped. It wasn't a direct result of what he saw, it was a result of what he didn't have the foggiest idea. Or would it be a good idea for me? I say, who he didn't see. Amy was gone, despite the fact that his heart at first dropped. Alessandro tried to avoid panicking, as he was certain Amy had recently gone on. As arranged, he was sure that she was perfect around the bend, so he gradually swam around the 90-degree wall and saw only lovely tapered rocks, yet no Amy. Alessandro kept following the line, sure that Amy was a very short ways off. He was quiet at this point, restless, as he probably was aware overreacting would simply exacerbate everything. Inside the space of minutes, Alessandro had shown up at their leap line and stayed there for a few minutes prior to persuading himself that Amy was ahead, so he eliminated the leap line and started pulling it in as he swam back towards the fabulous Cenote's mainline. This would be his most memorable misstep, as this implied in the event that Amy was still behind him. There was no line for her to follow, and as a jumper's most memorable time plunging into this specific cavern, the chances of enduring were not in support of herself at this point. Alessandro was certain Amy was simply around the following corner, and when she wasn't, it was there. Following, etc. Once Alessandro arrived at the fundamental line, he eliminated his treat. Amy had not set one as they anticipated, utilizing Alessandro's, since they would constantly be together. As Alessandro got increasingly close to the surface, his heart was thumping increasingly fast. He was certain Amy had quite recently ventured out in front of him. At this point, he had still not found her. Following an hour of swimming back to the terrific cenote, Alessandro, at long last risen up out of the water, and wildly inquired as to whether a female jumper with a blue cap had arisen. She essentially shook her head side to side. His heart fell under the water. In the great cenote, more jumpers were leaving the caverns. Ron and Shane were the second group that day to enter and leave the cenote, and all the more significantly, the group that went over an independent female jumper. Around a short ways from the leave, Ron and Shane saw Amy swimming alone, which at first they believed was odd, yet didn't address it, as some cavern jumpers like to plunge alone. Shane, being the group chief, swam up towards Amy and inquired as to whether she was okay. She immediately gave the general all right sign, and Ron and Shane thought everything was typical. She was quiet, breathing gradually, and appeared sure of her environmental elements. As a matter of fact, subsequent to affirming with her, they were certain that she was doing fine and dandy, so they swam on towards the leave. They would be the last two individuals to see Amy alive. Alessandro before long saw two bombarding lights somewhere out there. It was not since a long time ago he had gotten once more into the water. Such a quest for Amy, and he was confident as he adjusted the corner, however was met with disillusionment as he saw Ron and Shane coming his direction. He immediately took out his record, a little load up, that you can compose messages on submerged, and inquired as to whether they had passed one more jumper. Shane replied with 2 words, yes, solo. That was all Alessandro required, and subsequent to getting calls from Shane and Ron, started swimming like a lunatic through the cavern, seriously jeopardizing himself. As he became messy, he swam as far as possible back to Cenote, and before long, rose up out of the water, shouting Amy's name. There was no response, only confounded swimmers. Alessandro was in a condition of frenzy, and more awful, he had been submerged for a sum of 1 hour quickly leaving him with basically no air. He had the option to get a canister from another jumper, and at 2:13 p.m., lowered himself back into the cavern. He swam back to the first point, lost Amy, close to no-name Cenote, and that is the point at which he saw her. Amy was lying on her back, near the line with her treat, introduced right close to her. Controller was presently not in her mouth. Alessandro was surpassed by sheer distress, and got his extraordinary attempting to push it into her mouth. He felt that this was only a bad dream, and Amy would simply open her eyes, chuckling at him as though it was all simply an inadequately composed joke. Yet it was not so. He took her to Cenote no name, where he attempted to do mouth-to-mouth. As he was unable to surrender, he felt as though he had bombed her, and in shock, stone confronted, could just attempt to bring her back. Shane and Ron had likewise returned the cavern after they heard what was happening. They rose up out of Cenote no name, started helping Alessandra do mouth-to-mouth. However, it was all to no end. Amy was gone. They understood they had no real option except to take Amy's body back to the surface in stupendous Cenote, and the three jumpers hesitantly moved her body into the water, lowered themselves, and started the brief swim back. 35 minutes swimming through the most gorgeous caverns on the planet, clutching the body of an individual jumper. No preparation might at any point set you up for this. They returned to the Cenote town. Arose with Amy, encompassed by police. Their positions were finished, yet their lives could never go back. Alessandro got the vast majority of the fault from the plunging local area after the episode, as he had eliminated the line and treats that would have been Amy's aid out of the cavern. Yet he was back plunging weeks after the fact. She lost her life, accomplishing something that she was enthusiastic about, and seeing probably the most lovely perspectives on earth. Amy might not have made do, assuming the hardware was abandoned, yet she may simply have you